The Honourable Darren Hughes.
Chairman, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to take a call on part one during this example of the government's bold agenda for reform in our country that sees us sitting under urgency on a Saturday. This part one, of course, is the science section. We'll come to other parts during the morning. And, of course, we've been told by members opposite that they're not scared of hard work, but we've only had the most briefest of calls of all from them during various parts of the morning. Roger Douglas, who came to Parliament to try and reform the state sector, couldn't even speak for 1 minute on a bill that reforms the state sector. So we're grateful to the Minister in the chair who is at least engaging on some of the issues. And although we've got a lot of criticism of him, at least there's some praise in that respect for the fact that he is taking it very, very seriously. But that's not what we're seeing from other areas. I've got about 3 points I want to make, sir, 3 different clauses that I'd like to address with you this morning. And the first one is Clause 7, the purposes for which specified research, science and technology funding may be allocated. And subclause 2 of Clause 7, subsection 2, sets out 6 criteria for which there are purposes that are considered to be germane for the funding of sciences. And so I think that the areas the Minister has set out are far too narrow. And in particular, sir, I'd like him to comment on the complete absence of any focus on Māori research, science and technology in this bill. I see the Māori Party are supporting this bill, and I would ask them, sir, to reflect on this part as well, because there is nothing in the purpose here which specifically says that there is a role for this new agency to have a specific focus on Māori issues for research, science and technology. And I want to know from the Minister, if the New Zealand government is not going to have a focus on Māori issues for research, science and technology, which country is? Which country will look at Māori-specific issues, a Māori kaupapa view on research, science and technology, if he is specifically making sure that in this bill the New Zealand government is not going to? I think that is a massive omission and weakness in subsection 2. It puts the economy up there as the second reason for economic growth in the purpose which is purposes which are specified, but there is nothing there at all for Māori, and particularly, sir, for Māori economic development. Now, if we think of some of the areas where there are significant Māori asset holdings in the country, particularly around land holdings, I would have thought that the ability and innovation of research, science and technology to unlock some of the potential for Māori economic interests in our country would be absolutely suited and enhanced and lifted up under the purpose section of Clause 7. It is. I want to know from the Minister whether this was an overt decision by the government, whether the government, in considering this issue through Cabinet, made an overt decision to exclude a specified clause for Māori issues, because the member Moana Maki makes the point to me that Māori have specifically talked to him. Māori interests have come to him and said that they want to be included in the research, science and technology agenda. Clause 7, subsection 2 does not facilitate the ability of that to happen, and I think that's a mistake. I think that's an omission, and I don't think we should simply vote it through because it's Saturday morning and government members are grumpy at the Leader of the House for being here. That is not a reason not to speak. It is not. Well, the member looks particularly grumpy, but that could be for other reasons. But what we know well and truly is that there is an inability of the government to engage in debate on these issues because they've had enough. They've had enough, and they say, oh well, we should just get over it and go. But if getting over it and going means that Māori interests are forgiven, they're going to have to make sure that they do not make sure that they do not omit such important issues as Māori interests in this country. So I want the Minister to talk about that in a very important way for our country, because if the New Zealand government can't do it, no other government's going to. And he needs to address that about why that's being left out. The other purpose that's being left out, which I think is a big mistake, is making sure that there's a connection with private scientific research. This government talks long about the need to have public-private partnerships, and yet here we are at the cutting edge of the government's reform agenda. I mean, members of Parliament like Melissa Lee came here to merge the archive service of the National Library. She came here to make sure that the Foundation for Research in Science and Technology can line up with the Ministry of Research, Science and Technology. These are crucial issues of substance, amazing things that have happened, and yet what we now know is that they will not have have the gumption to talk about it, particularly to bring that private focus through. So we want to know in the purpose section, the first clause that I want to talk about, 7.2, why the Māori focus is not there, Mr. Chairman, and also why the private focus is not there, because I think, Mr. Chairman, I think that if the Minister has cause to reflect on that, he may be able to inform the committee, and we could amend this right here and now. We could introduce G, and to have a kaupapa Māori focus. I'm sure if that amendment was put up, Tuatoro Flavell from the Māori Party would support that. He seems to be getting some notes at the present time on that very matter, because I can't believe the Māori Party would vote for a clause that specifically excludes the ability of Māori to be recognised overtly. Now, we know the National Party went through a phase where things Māori were unpopular, and the 2005 intake campaigned on the Kiwi Iwi billboards, and some ministers, particularly one I see on the front bench, cackled and giggled away about how brave they're being in the brash years. That was an amazing thing, she thought. Then that kind of went out of vogue because it was all Tihei Modiora with the Māori Party, getting in with them. And I think in Clause 7, they could let us know whether or not they genuinely meant that stuff, or whether or not that was just a passing moment in time. Well, just one of those things you do in opposition but not in government. That could be the new principle of the Brownlee government over there. Oh, no, there's so much to say, Mr. Brownlee, because I know there's only a limited number of calls between now and midnight, and I intend to take all of them before I come back on Monday morning, because I want to make sure we're working very hard, and the Leader of the House shouldn't be so surly about his inability to run a program. His inability to actually put together a program where people could agree on things. So, and that would not fit with Clause 7, sir, I must admit. And Clause 7 would not include that. But Clause 7 does put the Māori focus and the private focus. I would, particularly on that Māori issue, if the Minister ignores everything else I say, I can understand that. But on that Māori issue, I'd like to hear from him, because at one time he was the opposition spokesperson for the eradication of political correctness. That's what he was. Wayne Mapp was had a portfolio about eradicating political correctness, and I want him to know whether or not his bias and prejudice on that matter is why Clause 7 has come through. Well, huge success. The portfolio didn't survive a change of leader. As soon as Brash was gone and Jerry Brownlee got sacked as Deputy Leader of the National Party, the portfolio was gone, as part of the long decline of Jerry Brownlee's career, which started the moment that John Key took the leadership and Wayne Mapp lost his portfolio. But I was responding to an interjection, sir. The next thing I want to say is briefly on Clause 8, subsection 3, para B, about the conflicts with the board being directed to allocate funds for the benefit of a particular person. I trust the Minister's actually got quite a sensible approach on this about how the board will operate. I want to know about him, though. Well, because I'm a generous person, it's ridiculous. But I want to say this. I want him to give us an assurance that he will not have this board modelled on the way the New Zealand Transport Agency board has been modelled in this respect, because we see extraordinary political interference from the Minister of Transport with respect to a similar kind of clause in another law. So I'd like him to give an assurance to the House that the kind of political interference that Stephen Joyce undertakes, particularly around ridiculous roading proposals for the people of Kapiti, won't be repeated in the science fair. But that's just by the by. The next clause I wanted to address, sir, was Clause 10, down at subsection 7. This is very important, because this bill is at the heart of the government's reform agenda. This bill is how they're going to transform the New Zealand economy, turbocharge New Zealand, catch up with Australia, and bring step change for working families in New Zealand. This bill is part of the reform agenda to do that. And subsection 7 refers to all the administrative services being transferred over to the new ministry to enable the board to carry out its function. And that goes to the heart of the cost of this piece of legislation becoming law. Now, at the time, Minister Tony Ryle, let's not say any more about that, he said that over 3 years this bill would save $20 million through the savings in administrative costs. Now, I'd like to know from the Minister under Clause 10, subsection 7, how much will there be in savings as a result of the RST changes, and what are the administrative costs that are being transferred for the Ministry to pick up for these two boards to operate? If it's $20 million over 3 years for the whole package, what proportion of this fits in under the research, science and technology banner? Because we've not had anywhere that I can see in here, sir, an explanation of what those costs are. And if the government is trying to get the deficit down because they've borrowed money for tax cuts, we're running a big deficit in New Zealand, if this reform agenda is about reducing costs, then surely the Minister will be able to tell us what burden of costs are going to be put on the Ministry under this particular clause, because it seems to me this could be an area where any of the savings that Minister Tony Ryall has identified could easily be eaten up by the board functions. He's told us that there will be 2 boards under the purpose clause, clause 3A, that the purpose of the part is to establish boards. I was going to